Greetings. In this video, we are going to learn how to record a macro to create basically a sub, and then modify that sub so that it becomes more general purpose and can be used not just for what you recorded it for, but by passing arguments to the sub, we can make it much more general purpose and harness it to do a lot of great things by putting it into a loop and then passing it different things in the loop. So for the use case that we have here, this particular exercise comes with a zip archive which you can download, which we'll put in the comments to this video. And in that zip archive there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 files. So first of all, there's an estimator.xlsm, and that is this workbook right here that we started with. And then there are these series of extra workbooks called grading, paving, sewer, storm drain, and water. And these are some files, excerpts from some files I actually got from a former student years ago. And that student worked for a city, and they had to come up with cost estimates for different civil engineering projects. And they had this huge list of items and prices associated with them. And they came in different files like this. So this is just a very condensed version of that. So if I open the grading spreadsheet, you can see that there's slope landscaping and irrigation, siltation fence, desilting basin, and again, this is just a small snippet of the complete list. But for each of these items, there's a count, the number of items, then a unit cost, and then a total cost. And so these are issues associated with grading. We also have paving, asphalt overlay, and again with counts and unit costs and total cost. And we have the same thing for sewer, curb and gutter, so forth. And so the idea is that you may have these separate files where people are putting together these large lists of information and costs, but then you want to be able to aggregate that into a single combined list that you could then use to print a total cost estimate. And of course there are a lot of different variations of this that you could consider. You could have it just pull out you could have a way of marking which parts in here you want to pull out and have your VBA code kind of iterate through it and scrape out the parts that you're interested in. But in this case, we're assuming that what we want to do is grab this content from each of these files, and we want to put it into this master copy, this estimator.xlsm. And what we're going to do is we have up here a list of each of these files, and then we have a path to where they're located. And when you click import files, we're going to loop through this list, and we're going to open each of those files one at a time, and we're going to copy that information, and we're going to copy it into we're going to create a new sheet for each of these and copy that information into a sheet. So when we're done, we have these extra sheets with all of that information. And then when we do build summary, it's going to pull that into this summary table. So you might have gotten lost there a little bit, but I promise you when we're done, it's going to be a really impressive solution. So again, we're going to be pulling information from multiple sheets, or from multiple separate files, separate Excel files, and then combining that into a single aggregate report. And so to accomplish this, there are a series of instructions over here. And we're going to start with item 1, record a macro called import file that does the following. Creates a new sheet and renames it, opens one of the extra workbooks, grading.xlsx for example, selects everything in the workbook just open, copies it to the clipboard, and then pastes it to the top left corner of the new sheet in the workbook, and then closes the extra workbook. So let's switch over to the Developer tab, and we'll record a macro, and we'll call this import file, singular. Click OK. And first thing, we're going to go down, we're going to create a new sheet. We're going to right click on that tab and select rename. That's actually off the screen a little bit, so I'm right clicking on this and selecting the rename command. I'll call it my sheet, and then we are going to do file, open, and we're going to browse to here. We're going to open grading.xlsx. I'm going to click in this upper left corner here. That'll copy, that will select everything in this entire sheet. We do that because we don't know, each of these sheets could have a different number of rows, theoretically a different number of columns, but we're going to assume the columns are the same, but it could have a different number of rows. So we're just going to, by selecting everything, we're going to guarantee that we have everything we need. And then I'm going to do Control C to copy that to the clipboard. Oops, that didn't work. Let's right click and copy. There we go. And then I'm going to go back to Estimator, right click and do paste. And then we'll go back to our, let me click on this other window, and then I am going to close that window and click no at this. It says there's a large amount of information on the clipboard. We're going to say don't worry about it, and then stop recording. Okay, so that created an extra sheet called My Sheet, which we're going to delete that right now. We don't need it anymore. And then we're going to go in now. Let's look at our instructions. Part 2, modify the import file macro so that it takes two arguments, the path to the extra file and the name of the new sheet. Modify the macro code so that it assigns the sheet name to the new sheet and opens the designated file. And then it talks about this thing called sheets.count. I will tell you about that once we start coding it. So let's go in and let's start looking at our code. Let me resize my window here so we can have everything within our where we're recording this. Okay, there we go. And this code already had a module 1 that had some code in there, which I'll show you in a minute, to build a summary table and to delete extra sheets. Let me see, let me resize things a little bit. There we go. And then we just created, by recording the macro, this import file macro. And so it says sheets.add after active sheet. So this creates a new sheet, and then it selects that sheet and changes its name to My Sheet. Changes the path to temp/estimator, and then it opens this file, ctemp estimator grading.xlsx. So these two lines of code right there will open the file. And then cells.select, this selects all of the cells. Selection.copy, that copies it to the clipboard. And then it says Windows estimator.xlsm activate, so that brings the estimator window to the front. Paste, then activates the other window, and then closes it. So what we want to do is we want to modify this so that it works not just for the grading sheet, but for the grading.xlsx file, but for any one of those files. And to do that, we are going to we're going to add some input arguments. We're going to have two arguments. The first one is we're going to call it file path, which is a string, and the second one is sheet name as string. So we're going to pass to it a full path to a file. So that's starting at the drive letter, it goes all the way down to the file name as a text string, and that's going to go right here. And then we are going to pass in the sheet name, and that's going to go right here. And so instead of always always naming it my sheet and always copying in the data from grading.xlsx, we're going to tell it what file to use and then what to call that sheet. So first of all, we're going to take this sheet name argument and we're going to replace this right here. This new sheet that's created is called my sheet. Instead of naming it my sheet every time, we're going to call it, we're just going to take that argument, which is basically like a variable, and we're going to put it right there. So it's going to take, it's not going to name it SHEETNAME, it's going to take the contents of that argument, and that will be the name that's applied to that sheet. And then similarly, down here, instead of always opening this file, we're going to have it open the file contained in the file path argument. Now, let me go back. I'm going to undo that. But before we do that, you'll notice it says change directory to ctemp estimator, and then it tells it to open this file. We can actually delete this line of code because we don't need to actually change the directory to that, because this argument we're passing it to open has the complete path. Now, if this argument only had the file name, then we would need to change the directory. But since it has a complete path, it doesn't matter what the current active directory is. It will open that file. So again, we're just going to put right here file path, and then we're going to make sure when we call this sub, we pass in the correct argument that has the complete path. Now, another thing that we got to be careful with here, let me save my changes. You'll notice that it says the sheets.add method creates a new sheet. And when the first time you do that, that's called sheet 1. The second time you do it, it's called sheet 2. And so it says sheets.add after active sheet, sheets sheet 1. And we can't count on, whenever you create a new sheet, it's not going to be named sheet 1 every time. So we need to somehow change this code so that it's more generic, and so it'll work no matter what. And I'm going to show you a little trick for doing that. So if we tell it, when we add the sheet, instead of adding it after the active sheet, if we tell it to put it at the very end, so no matter how many sheets you have, it puts it after the last one, then we can guarantee that the sheet we're working with is the last one in the list. And then if we have a way of referencing the last one, then we can always make sure that we're operating on the right one. Now there's a way that I've figured out how to do that that's kind of cool. If you say, so by the way, instead of doing sheets, now normally you can put a name here like sheet 1, but you can also give it a number, like sheets 1 for the first one, sheets 2 for the second one, and so forth. But if you knew exactly how many sheets you had, you could tell, and you could give it that number, then it would put it after the last one in the collection. And it turns out there is an easy way to do that. If you go to the sheets object and do sheets.count, the count property would return the total number of sheets. So if we say put it after sheets.count, this expression will turn the number of the last sheet in this collection in the workbook, and then it will put it right after the last one. Then after it does that, if you reference sheets.count, that count will be incremented by 1, and it will then be referencing the one you just created. So if we go down, if we take that and we put it right here, so instead of sheets 1, we say sheets.count, then we will, so what this line does, it says create a new sheet after the last one. At that point, the one you just created is the last one. So then this says, okay, take the last sheet and select it, and then change its name to sheet name. So that's an important part of doing that to make it more general purpose. Now let's look down here. Let's look at a couple of other things. Another problem that we have to deal with here, it says, Windows estimator.xlsm activate and activesheet.paste. So what this does, it makes that sheet our estimator window active, and then it pastes into it. There's another we can actually combine these into a single statement. So again, let me recap. What we did when we recorded it is we opened the other workbook and it was in the front, and then this brings our estimator sheet to the front, pastes the information in, then it goes back to the other window and closes it. We need to make this more efficient because we're switching back and forth between the windows. We need to know what those windows are called, and we know what this one is called, but this one is going to change. And we could take that path and extract off the file name, but there's actually an easier way to do this. What we can do is we can say, instead of ActiveSheet.paste, we can say this workbook .ActiveSheet.paste, and then we can get rid of this whole line. We don't, and what that does is you don't need to bring that sheet to the front to paste that information in. And this workbook, remember you've got two workbooks open at this point in time. So when you use the this workbook object, it says, okay, this workbook, in other words, the one containing this code, which is the estimator sheet, go to its active sheet and paste whatever is on the clipboard. Okay, then we can eliminate this that makes that grading sheet active, because it still should be active because we didn't change which sheet was in front. And when I say active in this context, it means which worksheet is at the very front. So we can just say at that point, say active window.close. So when we open that extra workbook grading or whatever, it brings it in front. We select all the cells, copy, we paste it into this workbook, which is the one with the code, estimator, and then active window.close just closes our active window. So this should do everything we need to do. So let's do save, and we can now go on to the last part. Write code associated with the import files button so that it loops through the list of files and calls your new custom sub to import the list of files. You'll need to delete the extra sheets before you run the code each time. So let's do that. So what we're going to do is we are going to write some code for the import files button. That code is going to start on row 8, and it's going to loop through this list, and each time through the list it's going to take this path up here. This tells us where the files are located, and I need to change that to C:/temp/estimator. Okay, and by the way, if I put a backslash on the end of that, that makes my code a little bit easier later on. So this is the folder where these files are stored. That's a path to the folder. So if we take this string and we append it with this, we'll get the full path to that file. And then this is the sheet name that we want to use. So let's go ahead and write that code. Whoops. Do this again. We need to go design mode, import files. Right down here, we're going to start out by saying, here, let me scroll this up a little bit. So we're going to need a row counter, dim my row as integer, my row equals 8, do until cells my row comma 2 equals null. And then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say my row equals my row plus 1 loop. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm just building the main structure of the loop before we start worrying about what the loop is going to do. And that what that does, it starts at row 8 and it keeps looping until it reaches, it finds an empty cell, and then it's going to stop. So each time through here, all right, so now that we've got the loop, we're going to write our code to build that path. So I'm going to declare another variable here, my path as strings. We're going to, the code to build that path is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to do it on a separate line of code. I'm going to say my path equals range path. Now, by the way, this cell right here is called path. So I'm just accessing that. I could say B4, but this works as well. Path, and then I'm going to append onto that cells my row comma 2. So, whoops, what am I missing here? Oh, I forgot to put the end of the double quote. There we go. So again, what I'm saying is I'm going to read this using range path, and I'm going to append onto that this file, what's in cells my row comma 2, and then at that point it should say c:/temp/estimator/stormdrain.xlsx, and we could step through it in the debugger to make sure that occurs. So now we need to grab the sheet name from column 3, and we're ready to call our custom sub. So we're going to say import file. We just do the name of the sub and then space. When you're calling a custom sub, you do not put the arguments in parentheses. You do that for a function, but not for a sub. And so we're going to pass it this path we just created. And then now we need to pass it the sheet name, which is cells myrow comma 3. And that should work. Okay, let's give that a shot. Go back to Excel, save our changes, and we'll cross our fingers here and hope this works. We're going to exit, let's exit design mode. Click import files, and I'm going to have to click no each time this comes up. It's opening each of these files one at a time. And now we're done. So we've got a storm drain, sewer, water, grading, paving. And if we go back to the main sheet, and there's this build summary button. Now the code for this is already written, and what it does, it goes into each of these sheets and it copies their information. It starts in row 1 and loops down, and it copies all of this data into this table at the beginning. So if I do build summary, copies that in, and then it puts a total down at the bottom, $2.2 million. And so we have this nice summary. It has category, item, count, unit cost, total cost. And then, you could print out this table or copy it into a report or whatever you wanted to do. Now, and then there's also another button that just deletes all of the sheets except the main sheet, so that you can do this again. And but before we do that, I want you to notice a couple things. Let's go back. We're going to make some modifications to our code. One of the things we want to do is we want to say sheets 1.activate. So when we're done, we want it to take us back to the main sheet, and this line of code will do that. Now, another thing I notice is every time it opens a file, you get that question. Well, do you have a large amount of data copied to the clipboard? Do you want to save it? Yes or no? Those are kind of annoying when you're in a loop. So we're going to do something. We're going to say application dot display alerts equals false, and then after we do our loop, we're going to say application.display alerts equals true. So what this does is the application is the main application object, and it has this property called display alerts, and by default that's on. And what that does, it gives you these alerts that ask you to confirm different things along the way. So if we set that equal to false, basically we're turning it off temporarily, and then we won't get all those intermediate messages, and then at the bottom we can turn it back on. So that should make things go a little more smoothly. So let's try this again. Import files. So now you can see they're just opening and reading and copying them in. And when we're done, it pops us back to the main sheet, but all of these sheets have now been properly copied in. And now we can do build summary, and there's our summary. Delete the sheets, and they're gone. Import files again, brings them right back in, and it's beautiful. Works like a charm. So again, we recorded a macro that worked on a specific file, then we modified it to work on a file that we give it based on the path and also a sheet name. And then, we only have 5 sheets here, but you could have 50 sheets, or excuse me, I say sheets, I mean Excel files. You could have 50, you could have 500. There's no limit to, you just have to have a list of them. in this somewhere in your code that you can loop through. Now, it used to be that there was an object, a file search object in the Visual Basic object model, that where you could give it a path to a folder and it would return a list of all the files in that folder. And then you wouldn't even need to have that list. You could just, go to a subfolder and just get all the files in that, loop through all the files in that subfolder. That was incredibly convenient, but the problem was people would use it to write viruses to loop through all the files on your computer. So Microsoft smartly, I think, or wisely, I should say, took that out. So anyway, that's the end of this video. But this concept of recording a macro and then modifying it to making it more general purpose and then putting it in a loop can be one of the most powerful tools you have in Excel, using Visual Basic to automate your workflows. And so that's a great thing to remember and use.